Welcome to Theme 2, Rights and Responsibilities of the AQA GCSE Citizenship course. We're looking at rights and responsibilities within the legal system. In particular, how does the court system work in the UK? In the last video of this session, you would have covered the difference between statute law and common law. You would have also looked at the importance of having both statute and common law. In this video, we're going to cover what we mean by the judiciary and the separation of powers, the roles and qualities of a judge. The criminal justice system refers to the investigation of a crime from the initial investigation to acquittal or conviction. It is one of the major public services in the country, and it currently employs about 400,000 staff across the following agencies: the Police Service, the Crown Prosecution Service, Her Majesty's Court Service, the National Offender Management Service, including prisons and probation, and the Youth Justice Board. This refers to the public body which attempts to prevent offending by children and young people. In this session, you're exploring Her Majesty's Court Service. The separation of powers is a system where the three major branches of decision-making have separate powers in order to prevent power from being centralised and abused. Powers are separated into three bodies: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. The legislature refers to Parliament, so that's all 650 MPs that make up Parliament, representing all the constituencies in the UK, as well as the House of Lords, and obviously the role of the monarchy for more ceremonial reasons. The executive refers to the government, so this is the political party that makes up the majority in the House of Commons, and in particular, the Prime Minister and their cabinet. They have separate powers. The legislator's power is to make and change law. Ultimately, they debate and discuss laws in the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and finally gain royal assent, allowing a bill to finally become an Act of Parliament. The executive government have the power to put law into action, so they make some of the biggest decisions that affect the UK. The judiciary has the power to make judgments on law. This specifically refers to common law and the interpretations judges make of laws when passing sentences in court. As you can see, power is clearly then separated between these three bodies to ensure that power is not centralised and abused. However, they do not all work separately. They still do work together. The Prime Minister and their cabinet, and all of the other MPs that make up the majority party in the House of Commons, are still all members of Parliament who represent a certain constituency, and so they're also involved in debating and discussing legislation. On top of that, all members of Parliament in the House of Commons and the peers in the House of Lords scrutinise the work of government and hold government to account if they make mistakes. As mentioned in the previous video, the judiciary makes written judgments about certain cases if the law provided is unclear or ill-informed. This may then inform the discussions and debates that take place when legislation is being proposed, and ultimately holds Parliament to account. So there is definitely an overlap. Another thing worth noting is that the legislator refers to Parliament because they debate, discuss and make legislation, and that even though separation of powers does exist, parliamentary sovereignty is still a fundamental aspect of the British Constitution. This means that Parliament has the ultimate power because they are the elected body. They've been voted in by citizens. As you can see, we're looking at the relationship between the three bodies. So here, judiciary ties into rights and responsibilities of paper 2, and the role of the legislator and executive ties into paper 1, politics and participation. The UK does not have a strict separation of powers, as the UK doesn't have a written constitution. There is some overlap and fusion, but each body provides checks and balances on the other and holds them to account. What we mean by checks and balances is just checking on the other bodies and making sure that they're not making mistakes, abusing their power, and ultimately they're holding each other to account. Remember, judiciary is just the collective term for judges. It refers to courts' decisions through the role of judges and work of solicitors and barristers in court. We've just looked at what we mean by the term judiciary and the separation of powers. We're now going to move on to look at the roles and qualities of a judge. What are the roles and qualities of a judge? Beginning with the roles, they pass sentences, control the courtroom, hear evidence, instruct the jury on the evidence they have heard, encourage cooperation between each side and grant adjournments. Please make sure you do know some of the roles of the judge. You will find them in a courtroom. They might say something like life sentence or 15 years in prison and £1,000 fine, etc. Remember, it is the judge that passes the sentence and provides the sentence after the jury passes a verdict that is either guilty or not guilty. The judge then passes the sentence. What we mean by this is the punishment. Judges are free to provide a suitable sentence. This ties into what we were looking at when discussing common law and the level of flexibility judges have. Moving on to qualities. Judges need to be politically neutral and unbiased. They cannot take sides. They are a specialist in the field of law and have been a lawyer before even becoming a judge. They're usually very experienced lawyers who finally move on to presiding over a court. What we mean by the term preside is chairing the court or managing it. A judge should have excellent listening and communication skills. This ties into the separation of powers, in that the judiciary needs to be separate to the legislator and the executive, and their political opinions cannot influence their decisions when it comes to sentencing. How are sentences given? Here's some key words that you need to make sure you remember for your exam. Aggravating circumstances or factors. These are any factors, information or evidence presented in court that increases the severity or culpability. What we mean by culpability is blame of a criminal act. This means the defendant gets a harsher or longer sentence. Examples of aggravating circumstances is someone pleading not guilty when they are guilty, or someone using extreme violence during another crime they commit. Also, if someone has a previous criminal record or have committed previous crimes. There's many other aggravating factors and circumstances, but those are just some of the examples. Mitigating circumstances. These are the opposite to aggravating circumstances. They are any factors, information or evidence presented to the court regarding the defendant or the circumstances of the crime that might result in reduced charges or a lesser, shorter sentence. So this might be someone who's committed a first-time offence, or someone who's pled guilty, and so on. Mitigating circumstances would lead to lesser, shorter sentences, whereas aggravating circumstances would lead to harsher, longer sentences. There is a hierarchy of judges, and these are the different roles within that hierarchy. Magistrates are not really considered judges, but they do preside over a magistrate's court. They're volunteers who receive training and are supported by legal advice in the courtroom. They normally sit as a bench of 3 magistrates in a magistrate's court. You have tribunal judges who hear tribunal hearings, district judges who hear some of the most complex cases in magistrates' courts, other district judges who hear the bulk of civil cases in the county courts. You have recorders. These are judges who work part-time hearing criminal cases in the Crown Court and civil cases in the county courts. They're qualified barristers or solicitors. You have circuit judges. These judges hear criminal cases in Crown courts and civil cases in the county courts. High Court judges will usually sit in the High Court or may sit on some appeals in the Court of Appeal. Often they will judge serious cases in Crown Court trials. Lord Justice Appeals. These judges hear appeal cases in the civil and criminal divisions of the Court of Appeal. President of the Queen's Bench Division, President of the Family Division, Chancellor of the High Court, Master of the Rolls, all have different roles within different courts. The highest are the Senior President of Tribunals, who are the head of the judges in the UK Tribunal Service, Justices of the Supreme Court. These are judges who hear civil and criminal appeals in the UK's most senior court, which we'll learn about later on in this session. President of the Supreme Court. This is the head of the UK's highest domestic appeal court. And right on the top of the hierarchy is the Lord Chief Justice. This is the most senior judge in the UK, the head of an independent judiciary. Please note that you don't need to know this in a lot of detail, so long as you have a general understanding of the fact that there is a hierarchy of judges, that the Lord Chief Justice is up on the top, the role of magistrates, and which sort of cases judges might sit on, particularly in Crown Courts, High Courts, Court of Appeal, and Supreme Court. This is the current Lord Chief Justice. His name is Baron Thomas of Cumgead, the current Lord Chief Justice, the most senior judge in the UK. He was born in 1947. He was called to the bar in 1969 and was knighted when he became a High Court judge in 1996. Prior to his appointment as Lord Chief Justice, he was the President of the Queen's Bench Division. He became Lord Chief Justice in 2013 and is on a salary of £240,000 per year. We've come to the end of this video, where you've looked at what we mean by the term judiciary and the separation of powers. You've also looked at the roles and qualities of a judge, including key words like aggravating factors and mitigating factors. And within this, we've also looked at the hierarchy of judges that exist in the UK. You'll be continuing on with this session in the next video, where you'll explore how do you become a judge and comparing the appointment process between the USA and the UK, with an opportunity to answer a 4-mark question and mark someone else's response to that 4-mark question.